The Enemy Within. An original crime thriller audiobook story by the author, Declan Conner. Part 1. Sergeant Joe Ryman waited outside the office to the clerk who was to interview him for his transition out of the army. It had been the best part of an hour, and his patience wore thin. Just about to call it a day, and the office door opened. Ryman scoffed as the clerk beckoned him inside. No apology for keeping him waiting, which rubbed him up the wrong way. The clerk can't have been more than 20, and wet behind the ears. "Sergeant Ryman, please, take a seat." The clerk didn't make eye contact, simply picking up a file. "Well, that's quite a record you have there. Have you given any thought what you want to do when you leave the army?" Ryman shuffled on his chair. "No, that's why I'm here." "Any suggestions?" "I have, actually. With someone of your skills, there are plenty of specialist security firms looking for staff. I have a list here. Bodyguards are in high demand." He passed over a list with names and telephone numbers. Ryman didn't bother to look through the list and tossed it back onto the desk. Last thing he wanted was to wet nurse some narcissist celebrity. "That all you got? What about private contractors in conflict zones?" The clerk's cheeks reddened. "You'd need to seek those out yourself." Ryman shook his head and rose to his feet. "I think we're done here. Wait, I might have something. Since they built the border wall, the government reduced spending on border guards. The DEA are looking for volunteers to keep watch over the border in a joint command with the Army. But it's only minimum pay." That information piqued his interest. Money didn't come into the equation. Not with his Army pension due. The one thing he detested above all was the drugs flooding over the border. The clerk reached into his drawer and passed him a leaflet with the details. "If that's all you've got, I'll say good day to you." Ryman stuffed the leaflet into his pocket and headed out of the door to get to the local bar. When he arrived, it was almost empty. Just 3 locals on stools at the bar. He took a seat around the corner on a stool. "I'll have a bud." The bartender nodded. Ryman snatched a look at the 3 men at the bar when he was handed his beer. Their banter filled the room as they argued amongst themselves with their voices raised. So much for going for a quiet drink, he thought. The 2 things drilled into him in life was that you never discuss, were religion and politics. Apparently, no one had explained this to the 3 wise monkeys. They were going at it full throttle on the worst subject of all. Evolution versus creation. "Don't talk shit. How can you say God didn't create everything?" one of them said in a raised voice. "Because I learned about it at school, fuckwit. We evolved from apes. Haven't you seen the poster? That's bullshit. They ain't found no missing link." Ryman rubbed his hands over his eyes, while hoping the barman would keep them in order. "You're both right and both wrong," said the nearest guy to Ryman. "Oh, yeah, smartass, how you work that out," said the guy proposing evolution. "'Cause God was an alien. You need to watch the Ancient Aliens channel. They intervened with the DNA of what they found when they landed. That's why they'll never find a missing link." The guy in the middle who propounded creation by God jumped off his stool and faced the others while unsteady on his feet, clearly drunk. An appearance of rage spread on his face. Ryman could see this turning nasty. "Hey, play nicely," the barman called out. "Best change the subject, you guys," said Ryman and took a swig of his beer. He wished he'd kept his mouth shut when they all turned to him. "Who asked you to butt in, old man?" "Just saying, that's all. It's a touchy subject." He ignored the disrespect, not wanting to inflame the situation. "Is it now? Well, let's hear your thoughts. Enlighten us." Ryman sighed as all 3 of them appeared to stab daggers at him with their eyes. He wasn't about to back down. "Okay, you asked for it. Way I see it is, our family have a farm and they've planted hectares of potatoes for over 100 years. Not once have they dug them up to find strawberries." The guy who defended creation laughed, and then staggered in the direction for the John. Not so the other 2 who squared up to him. Ryman gripped his beer bottle, then let go of it with a wave of his shoulders and the rotation of his head. "Oh, a fucking smartass," one of them said, and grabbed a fruit knife from the bar. The bartender skedaddled into the service area. Ryman snickered. You gonna pick your teeth with that? I suggest you put it down and back off, fella, before someone gets hurt. The other guy picked up his stool, and the pair of them danced in front of him on their toes. Ryman let out a long drawn-out sigh and stepped off his stool. Okay, if that's how you want it, bring it on. He beckoned them on with the wave of his hands. The guy with the knife jabbed at him. Ryman grabbed his wrist, twisted, and then turned his arm with such force, it ended up behind his back. Ryman removed the knife from his now limp grip and tossed it over the bar in one swift move. The other guy brought the stool down at him. He swung around, only for the guy he was holding to get the full force of the bar stool. It broke up and the guy tossed it aside. Ryman let go of his assailant and he dropped to the floor. The other guy threw a punch, but Ryman stealthily sidestepped him, then sent him on his way with a kick to his butt. The guy almost took flight, his head crashing into the bar. Assholes, he mumbled. Ryman calmly walked back to the bar, finished off his beer and called out to the barman. You can come out now. A shrug of his shoulders and he left the bar to head for his quarters. He took out the leaflet the clerk had given him and read it under a street lamp, then sighed. All the incident back at the bar had told him was to confirm to him that the youth of today had no respect for their elders. Part 2. Ryman wondered why in hell's name he'd decided to volunteer for his latest gig. 10 years in SOG, the elite of the elite, handpicked as one of the cream of special forces to work under the CIA on Black Ops, and now what, he thought. He shook his head. Look at me. Damned recruits, kids these days don't know the freakin' meaning of duty and respect. 7th Special Forces Group out of Fort Bragg had dumped Ryman into an oddball team, when the commander handed him his red insignia on retirement to act as a volunteer to train recruits for the DEA. Not one of them had any experience in what was required. Dumb shit cherry amateurs, he'd thought when they were introduced to him for training. Bill Grundy, shelf stacker at Walmart, Michael Rutherford, nightclub security, and Pete Rogers, taxicab radio operator. It wasn't that he didn't care for them, he did, but it wasn't his job to show it. He prayed for them often enough. All he hoped was they would come out the other end of the experience alive and with values. It didn't help that training had been cut short and not one of them had ever seen active service. Okay, so they'd all been active part-time in the National Guard, big deal, he thought. But while he'd thought that, if insurgents came at them from all angles, he couldn't be sure how safe his back would be. Needs must, there is a war on, and we're stretched, his commander had said curtly. Some freakin' need, he mused. He'd saluted obediently and half wished they'd put him back out to graze. A gust of wind suddenly whipped the desert dust into a miniature twister, just as First Sergeant Joe Ryman took a deep intake of breath. Ryman nearly choked and dropped his binoculars in the dirt. A quick slug of warm water from his canteen did little to stop him from coughing and spluttering. From the vantage point of his camouflaged foxhole on a hillside, he picked up his field glasses and scanned the length of the border in his zone. It looked quiet enough. Intel hadn't reported any likely activity to HQ. According to the increased satellite chatter, an attack was imminent, but much further along the defensive line. All their forces had been mustered 100 miles to the east, expecting the insurgents to attempt a breakthrough. He cursed his bad luck for not being where the action was, when his thoughts were interrupted by voices in his earpiece. Dumb shit 2 to dumb shit 3. Got any smokes? Yeah. Piece of your wife's ass for a full pack, dumb shit 4, out. Ryman sighed. Cut it out, morons, maintain radio silence, Ryman growled through clenched teeth. Stick to the call signs. You got it, Red 1. Mind if I radio headquarters to add smokes to the next supply drop? Ryman tired of the banter. Maintain silence, that's an order. Rendezvous, 0200 hours. Red 1, out. Part 3. Ryman looked at his watch. 3 more hours to tunnel patrol. The hardest part of any observation mission was the solitude, he knew that. He'd seen many a Green Beret return from duty, either fucked up in the head, or with the mind of a jock philosopher, having worked out his own place in the universe. Ryman reckoned he stood somewhere in between his ass and the bottom of the crapper on the subject. Anyone in the service who didn't admit that they questioned their motives for doing what they did, he argued, they were either fooling themselves at best, or just plain lying asswipes at worst. It didn't assist matters, that on this mission, Ryman considered 1 in 4 of the population had at some time donated to the coffers of the enemy. Attorneys, garbage collectors, even government officials had all tossed their dollars into the pot. Damn it, you could stand at the trough pissing and not know the guy next to you supported the enemy, ran through his mind like slurry. His earpiece crackled. Local natives. Truck in sight. 3 o'clock, red 4, over. Ryman raised his binoculars, switched them to night vision and located a patrol driving east along the border road, this side of the line. Ryman pulled his mic to his lips. Red 3, local militia uniforms, range 800 yards, border road, estimated speed 50 miles per hour, traveling east. Driver, passenger, and 8 heavily armed in the back. The reply reverberated in his earpiece. I see them. Ryman took out his GPS device. Red 2, I'm sending you info. I've marked our GPS position. Send a burst to HQ to inform Blue Team. Oh, yeah, and add your order for the smokes. Ryman pressed send on his text communicator. Got it, 2 to 1, out. You forgot the red, dumb red fuck, Mick interjected. Cut it out, Mick, he heard Red 3 call out. Ryman rolled onto his back. Damn, I don't believe it. How many times do I have to drill it into them? No names, he mumbled under his breath. He checked the time. It was rendezvous hour. He wriggled from under his net, dropping his night visions into place on his helmet. A 10-minute hump and he could see they'd already arrived from their heat signatures. An odor permeated in his direction, and he stopped in his tracks, dropped to a crouch and made a 360. There was nothing in sight. That's the smell of skunk. For Christ's sake, freaking skunk, he growled. He charged onward toward the rendezvous in the gully. Who goes, Army, halt or I'll shoot, came out of the darkness. Red 1 here, put the weapon down, dumb fuck. Own up, who's been smoking weed? Ryman demanded. Chill out, Sarge, Pete's got bad guts, pleaded Bill, and they all laughed. Yeah, and I've got VD, but my dick don't smell like no whore. If I catch anyone smoking that shit, I'll have you on a charge in front of the commander. Understood? The laughter died down to the occasional fits of snickering. Understood, Sarge, they all replied in unison, with a few more token chuckles. Ryman watched in amusement as Pete turned on his close-quarter light, picked up a broken twig and started drawing figures in the dirt. Mick scrambled up the bank of the gully and returned to keeping watch from the ridge. A few minutes later Mick returned. What are you working out? Asked Ryman. Pete scratched the figures out with the twig. 3,520,000. Of what? Ryman asked him. Soldiers, stood an arm length apart along the 2,000-mile border. You been to West Point? Asked Bill. Who the fuck would deploy an army like that? Look what happened in World War I. Mick interrupted them. I just mined the whole fucking length and set up robotic machine gun posts. Then we could all play football and guzzle beer. Ryman sighed at the banter. Quiet, all of ya. Bill, you take east. Pete, you take west. I want you both to trek 2 miles with the tunnel detection equipment. Oh, and this time, set your GPS locators. No way you covered 2 miles last time unless you ran all the way. Geez, Sarge, said Pete. They can't build tunnels that quick. Do we have to go out every night? Do as you're ordered. What ya wants the enemy to do, flank us? Oh, and if either of you smartass shoots at as much as a jackrabbit, I'll put you on a charge for wasting ammo. Remember the rules of engagement and use your night vision. If you don't receive a response to a challenge, go to ground and call for backup. Shoot only if you're fired on. Yes, Sarge, their voices echoed in unison. Removing the detectors from their kit, they headed over the ridge. Back to your post, Pete, and keep your comms channel open. Ryman stared in amazement as Pete neared the top of the ridge. "Hey, turn that freaking light out," he said and shook his head. "Dumb fuck," he said under his breath. He headed back to his observation post. Settled in his foxhole, the temperature had dropped, and clouds obscured the moon. The joint in the nape of his neck started to ache. Damned arthritis. He cussed at the years of lying in rain-soaked jungles and damp ditches for his plight. There was no chance he'd report his condition to the medics back at base. Any sign of weakness and he knew they'd have him shipped out and pruning roses. Pete working out the numbers got him to thinking. What's the death toll over the border? 60,000, maybe. And yet we push the refugees back over the border claiming their plight is economic. Bullshit, economic my ass. Part 4. A message reverberated in Ryman's earpiece. "Sarge, truck's back," and it stopped. This was no time to chew his head off for not using the call sign. "Contact Red 2 and 4. Fill them in and tell them to hightail it back to their position." "Will do." Red 3, over. He checked that his binoculars were switched to night vision mode. Ryman began scanning the area. "Gotcha," he mumbled when he zoomed in on their vehicle. A quick count and he saw 8 bodies jump from the tail of the Deuce and a half. The group split up left and right. Red 3, monitor the right-hand group. Mark their position when they go to ground. Red 1, over. Will do. 2 and 4 are on their way. The truck pulled off the border road and disappeared in a gully. Ryman checked the coordinates in the eyepiece and pressed mark to store them in memory before continuing to scan. The driver and passenger appeared and split up. He felt a sense of relief. They were all back in position. Not one screw-up with the call signs, and they seemed to be on it. It didn't last long. "We gonna go and round them up, Sarge?" A red mist descended. "Shut the fuck up, we're not cowboys. Mark them when they stop and observe. They're not the enemy. They could have got wind of an incursion." At that moment, he would have given anything to be with his old team. All professionals in special operations, communications hadn't been necessary. All knew their task inside out. He heard Josh and Tex had bought it in an ambush in Iran near a hidden nuclear facility. Word had it from a waterboarded prisoner that they took out an entire platoon before they ran out of ammo. Then they charged the rest, knives drawn, and pulled the pins on their grenades to take a few more with them. It never made the news, but then their work never did. It was nothing they did wrong. The Iranians just got lucky, apart from it set their nuclear program back a few years. He heard Jones made it out, same as him, and across the border into Afghanistan. He wondered whatever happened to him and shrugged his shoulders. His thoughts were distracted with a comms message. "Radio's fucked. It's not cranking. No way to send for the cavalry." Ryman sighed. "And your satellite phone?" "Oh yeah, sorry, boss. I forgot about that." "Sorry, I mean, Sarge." "Oh shit, Red 1. Ryman scoffed. He pressed his earpiece to static, annoying him, then it cleared. UFOs straight ahead, reverberated in his earpiece. Ryman raised his field of vision. It was just a few dots in the sky at first, then more of them. They were moving slowly at low altitude, too low for fighter aircraft, and the heat signatures were tiny. He thought they could be geese. They were too near the ground for radar to detect them. He drew his mic to his lips. "Red 2, get on the phone to HQ, send a report with an estimate of the birds in the sky. Ask them if they've got a frequency jamming patrol in the area. Tell them we have a drone swarm incoming. Should we prepare a kill zone to pop some of them, Sarge?" "No, we're here to observe. Red 4, watch our flank." With the main defense force to the east, he just hoped they'd kept some in reserve for rapid deployment. "Frequency jammers are all tied up, Sarge. I need 5 minutes silence." "Maintain calm silence unless it's an emergency," said Ryman and turned over. He pulled out a mini-directional microphone boom from his pack and plugged the jack socket into his helmet. Pointing it in the direction of the formation, he cranked up the volume. It sounded like a swarm of hornets. The noise deafened him, so he lowered the volume. "Shit, definitely incoming." His comms earpiece came to life. "Fuck, zombies on our flank." "We been outflanked, Sarge. 300 yards to the rear. Do we open fire?" Ryman whipped the jack plug out, leaving a whistling sound in his ear from Red for screaming his message over the comms. He did an about-face on his belly, lifted the netting and scanned the terrain. It was clear as to why Red 4 had thought they were zombies. 2 more heat sources emerged from their cover as if they'd risen from the dead. He counted 5 in all. "Do not fire. I repeat, do not fire." "Keep tracking," said Ryman. He cursed as he got tangled in his net and turned to continue watching the flight path of the formation. Now the microphone wasn't needed. He could hear them buzzing overhead. One by one, their heat signal faded, as some landed. The noise of gunfire erupted and drowned out the noise of the formation. A beam of light appeared in the sky. Tracer bullets from left and right formed a cathedral arc across the sky. "Jesus, it's like a 4th of July firework display over there. Can we join in the turkey shoot?" "Quiet, dumb shit," you heard the Sarge. Ryman followed the beam to its source at the position of the truck. A quick scan left and right determined it was the militia firing. The rapid fire started to thin out the incoming. "They're gliding in." "What's happening on our flank?" asked Ryman to a rapid response. Zombies stopped clean in their tracks when the gunfire erupted. Now they've spread out in a line, maybe 30 or 40 yards apart. They keep bending down like they're picking stuff up. "Drop zone." It's a freakin' drop zone, that was obvious, he thought. His orders were to observe, but this was too good an opportunity to miss. He decided to work out his excuses later. "Red 2, 3, and 4, listen up. Each of you grab a roll of tape from your kit. Red 2, work to the rear of the drop zone and cover each takedown from your position facing right. Red 3 and 4, take position each end of their line and work your way in. Maintain calm silence at all times. I want them tied up Texas style and gagged. I'll cover the opposite side takedowns from here. No shooting and no knives, you know the drill. I want them alive." They each acknowledged the order in turn. He turned his back on the gunfire, having reckoned they'd be too busy to notice what his team was up to. He took the cover off his rifle scope and positioned it facing to the rear and observed. "Number 1 down, well done, don't fuck it up now." He trailed Red 3 in the crosshairs of his scope to his next target. It was over in seconds. "That's my boy." 1 left. Red 3 and Red 4 converged on the last target. "Motherfuckers," he mouthed in disbelief. Their target slipped between them and set off running. Horror struck him. One of his team held out an arm. He watched as the target stopped in mid-flow and fall to ground. The next 5 minutes seemed like hours as he watched them standing at the body. Then relief rolled through him as they bent over and dragged the target to his feet. Must have tasered him. "Yup, there is a God. Thank you. Round them up, I'm coming in. Red 2, give them a hand." The gunfire had stopped some time ago, and he crawled into position to see what was happening. Militia had mounted the rear of their deuce-and-a-half. Driver and a passenger were talking at the side of the cab. He grabbed the cord for the directional microphone and pulled it toward him. "Calvin's cartel is fucked for now. Reckon we took 2/3 of the drop out. Yeah, let's get back to base. They're sending us a fresh supply through the tunnel in a few hours, and we gotta send some weapons back." He continued to observe until they entered the cab and drove away. Part 5. Approaching his team, he stumbled on a drone and picked it up. The prisoners were in a huddle whimpering. His face beamed with pride. "Red 1 approaching," he called out. His smile turned to a frown as he joined them. They didn't even acknowledge his presence and he placed the drone next to a pile of plastic sacks. The sight of the prisoners shocked him. Jesus, they can't be no more than 12 years old, Ryan thought. His eyes narrowed. "This is great shit, top grade," said Bill and snorted a line of white powder the length of his combat knife blade. Mike was wiping powder off his nose, and Pete was stuffing his fatigues with packets. Ryman flicked his safety off, swung his automatic rifle on his hip and pointed the barrel at them. They all stopped what they were doing at the sound of the safety click and faced him. Mike rose to his feet, a scared shitless look on his face. Come on, Sarge, how we gonna know what it is without a sampler kit, pleaded Mike. Try it, it's uncut. Mike's chest puffed out, looking like he could take on the world. Empty your pockets, you dumb shits, he barked and kicked the knife out of Bill's hand. Whoa there, you got it Grandad, said Bill, and they frantically turned out their pockets. Ryman ignored the derogatory remark. Mike, phone HQ and get a chopper out here for you three, the prisoners and these bags of crap. Oh, and don't forget the drone here for them to check out. Mike edged behind Bill. What about you? Asked Mike. Ryman scoffed. He knew what he had in mind, but realized they weren't up to the task. I'll make sure our position isn't compromised until a new team gets here. Bill, load those parcels back in the sacks, he said, still covering them. He backed off and sat on a rock, his finger still on the trigger. They kept shooting him furtive glances, but he just stonewalled them until the sound of the chopper broke the quietness of the night. Pass me the satellite phone, he ordered. He watched as they loaded the sacks with a drone and the drugs and them they herded the prisoners on the chopper. Their faces looking back at him seemed concerned as the chopper took off, but he stared straight through them. Too late for that now, he snarled. With a heavy heart and an empty head, he trudged back to their position. They know the price of everything and the value of freaking nothing, he philosophized on arriving at his foxhole. Whatever happened to respect and the rules of law? The night's action had taken its toll, and he slipped into his sleeping bag. An incoming signal on his satellite phone broke his sleep. HQ to Red 1, radio check. Reading you loud and clear. Fresh meat dispatched. Gotcha, Red 1, out. He looked at the time on his wristwatch. Damn, only 2 hours sleep. Dawn had started to break. He detected the sound of a car, wriggled out of his sleeping bag and scanned the highway with his binoculars. Civil police? It was a good distance away, and he reckoned he could get to the border road to meet them. He walked fast in the direction of the border. It was like walking over a killing field. Debris from the drones was scattered everywhere. They must have used 7.6 caliber rounds, he deduced. There wasn't a whole drone in sight and not a single parcel of coke. He came to the militia's position from the night before, bent down and picked up a metal shell case. Yup, 7.6 all right. To the left was a pile of shotgun casings. Pump action. I knew it. He stood in the middle of the road, when it suddenly struck him. It occurred to him the cops weren't gonna know he was a friendly. He placed his weapons at the side of the road and held his hands up to flag down the car. The car stopped some distance away, and 2 cops jumped out, weapons drawn. One of them called out. On the ground, face down, arms out. He did his best to comply but felt stiff and moved slowly into position. Arms behind back. He felt the click of the cuffs, and they assisted him upright. 7th Special Forces, asked the officer, looking at his insignia. Wrong side of the border for you, ain't it? He asked in a Texas drawl. You got some ID? Jay, look at these weapons. Man, they're mean. The officer glanced over at his weapons. There's a telephone number in my top pocket and a code. Just phone it in. The officer fished in Ryman's pocket and took out the note, then walked away and made a call. He returned with a more sympathetic look on his face. Sorry, sir, he said and released the cuffs. What brings you out this neck of the woods? Ryman greeted his question with a stony stare. Where does the local militia hang out around here? 10 miles back toward El Paso, there's a roadside cafe, take a right along the dirt road for a couple of miles. You'll see a white building. Doug Brennan and his crew built it as a holding center for illegals until ICE can deal with them. Thanks, he said and turned to pick up his weapons before heading back to his foxhole. The climb was steeper than he imagined in the heat of the day. He took his map of the area from his kit bag and laid it unfolded on the ground. The cafe stop was visible, but not the dirt road. He took a marker pen from his pocket and drew a line to scale to represent the road. He marked it with a cross and the word, tunnel. Committing the coordinates and topography to memory, he left the map where it lay and hauled his kit bag onto his back. Ryman shadowed the road in the direction of El Paso. He checked his GPS and estimated he'd been humping 5 miles. The will was there, just as it had always been, but his legs were not as conditioned as they used to be. He stopped briefly to nibble on some rations and take a drink of water to stave off dehydration in the relentless rays of the sun. At 8 miles, he started to waver, and his legs felt like they'd run away from him. He collapsed to his knees, removed his helmet and kit bag, and then swept his brow with the back of his hand. He knew he'd gone his length by his body and mind's reaction to fatigue as his mind drifted back to his mission in Iran. Josh and Tex, shit, why did they do it, ran through his mind. It had always bugged him. He fished in his kit bag and transferred some items to his pocket. His mind drifted back to the disastrous mission in Iran. Damn. Me and Jones had them covered, ready for them to fall back before they signaled retreat. Why did they stay? He sighed. And then you get saddled with dumb shits like those morons. He struggled back to his feet and took hold of the straps of his kit bag before releasing them again. He pushed on. Should have taken up farming like my dad always wanted, he thought. Don't join up, son, he heard his mother's voice pleading with him. He envisioned her arms clinging around him, tears running down her cheeks. The terrain shimmered. A headache developed. He took his helmet off, and it slipped from his fingers. The cafe stop came into view on his left like a mirage, and he angled right, zigzagging and stumbling. He fell to his knees and felt tightness in his chest. Snatching the fasteners of his body armor, he discarded it. Come on, Ryman, he heard Tex call out to him while hallucinating. Snap to. Lazy bastard, Josh's voice rang in his head. Echoes of his old team running around in his head were replaced by his recruits' voices. Mike laughed as if mocking him. Are you coming or what, red fucking one? Granddad, Granddad, he heard Bill's calling out in a childlike voice. He gritted his teeth and gathered all his willpower, forcing his body to stand. Unsteady on his feet, he swayed as if intoxicated. The magic of a swig of water from his canteen worked, and he felt a sudden surge of strength, then tossed it aside. The onward trek led him to a thicket, and he peered out from behind a tree toward a white building. A deuce and a half sat out front. He could hear voices and unfastened the flap to one of his pockets to retrieve his directional microphone. He put the jack plug to his helmet and felt a sharp dig in his head. Shit, no helmet. He discarded the microphone. A bush to his left offered a better vantage point, and he crawled behind it, bringing binoculars to bear on the scene. There were 6 men removing crates from the back of the truck as others loaded brown packets. He knew he'd heard right back at the incident along the border road. The signs on the crates were clear: automatic rifles, marked on some, grenades, on others. Those brown packets sure ain't no laundry, Ryman thought. One of the men called out. Get that shit loaded faster. We need to get over the border. Last of the cokes coming through the tunnel. I want this load in Austin quick, and we got another 5 loads after that. Then we can cut loose the young women in the pen, deliver them to their pimps in Las Vegas. One of them holding a parcel answered him. Shit, Doug. Moving as fast as we can. With the guy saying that, he now knew who their leader was. That's some cover operation he's got there, Ryman thought. His mind emptied of the fatigue, only leaving a vision of purpose. He clipped a grenade into place in his rifle, flicked the switch on his rifle to auto, and checked his magazine. His senses heightened, and his eyesight seemed crystal clear. He casually stood, turned on his beacon transmitter, and with his rifle shouldered, he walked into plain view of the militia. Halt, Army, put your weapons down, he called out to 2 armed guards at the front of the truck. They swung around and raised their weapons, one of them firing off a shot and catching the sleeve of his jacket. A squeeze of the trigger and they fell before him. Dumb fucks. The rest were slow to react and scattered, drawing their pistols. He took cover behind the engine block of a car. Bullets slammed into the vehicle. He unleashed the grenade. The deuce and a half disintegrated in a fireball and took a few of the men with it. Incoming rounds flashed past him, but he just marched on, picking them off one at a time, until he emptied the magazine and replaced it, flicking the switch on his rifle to 5 rounds. Doug made a dash inside the building. Ryman kicked the door open and walked inside, glancing left and right down the corridor. A sound of a click to his left alerted him, and he squeezed the trigger. All 5 shots sprayed the drywall. He heard a groan, and something drop. Latino voices called out in distress to his left, and he headed down the corridor. A noise behind a door partly open made him drop to one knee, pushing it fully open with the barrel of his rifle. A shotgun blast went over his head, and he squeezed the trigger. All 5 bullets hit the target. Liquid ran down Ryman's forehead, and he wiped it with the back of his hand. Blood. One of the pellets had grazed him. The mumble of voices and people crying grew louder as he came to a steel-barred door with a large key hung on the wall. He counted at least 20 Mexicans packed into the small cell, men, women, and children. A woman at the front was holding a baby, tears streaming down her face. "Ayuda, señor," she pleaded. He put his fingers to his lips and signaled them all to crouch and cover their ears. He returned to the open door, stood at the side of the frame and loaded another grenade to his rifle. Taking aim toward the wall at the end of the corridor, he unleashed the grenade and ducked inside the doorway. The dust from the explosion hadn't dispersed as he grabbed the key and unlocked the cell door. "Vamos. A la norte," he shouted and signaled the direction. They streamed out through the hole the grenade had made. He turned and crouched to give cover, firing off a round every time he saw a rifle barrel appear at the other end of the corridor. He sensed they all made it out and took a stun grenade from his belt, pulled the pin, then rolled it to the end of the corridor. 4, 5, he counted and squeezed his eyes shut. At the sound of the explosion, he charged forward, opening his eyes and flicked the switch to single shot. He dropped one guy to his left. One dropped to his right. He caught sight of Doug scrambling out of an open window. He started to kick in the rest of the doors. The last door opened to reveal a large kitchen and canteen. The sight of what he discovered left him astonished. There were at least 200 brown packets and 10 crates of the latest automatic rifles. He buckled as he felt a blow to his left leg. A guy to his left was crouched gripping a knife. Ryman's blood dripped from the blade. A squeeze of the trigger and a black mark appeared between the guy's eyes and he crumpled. Ryman paid no attention to his wound and approached an open trapdoor in the floor. "Tunnel," he thought, and lay on his front, craning his neck. There was the distinct sound of scraping and echoes of voices. "Sounds like we got rats," ran through his mind. He rolled over, sat with his back to the wall and kept glancing at the door, his rifle rested on his legs. Blood started to make a pool around him, but he carried on about his business and rummaged in his pockets. He took a block of C4 he'd purloined from training exercises and started to cut it into sections and fix electronic detonators. A cable ran from a generator at the side of him and into the tunnel. He reached out and turned off the power, then sliced the cable. Ryman put another explosive on the generator's gas tank. A smile appeared on his face when he noticed a propane bottle. Ryman stared at the pipes leading to the heating system. He crawled over to the propane bottle and gripped the nut. To his surprise it turned, and he fully released it and set the rest of the explosive in a hurry. He used a table to haul himself to his feet and made for the exit with the electronic remote detonator at the ready in one hand and his automatic rifle in the other. The muscle in his leg felt weak from the wound as he limped into the sunlight. No more than 10 yards from the building, he came face to face with Doug, holding the Mexican woman with her baby as hostages. The woman bit her captor's hand and dropped to the ground. All he could see was the business end of a double-barreled shotgun. "Die, you dumb mother," he screeched while raising his rifle and squeezed both triggers in his hands. Part 6. Helicopters landed at the site of the holding center. Troops exited and fanned out to secure a perimeter. The waiting police officers walked over to greet the commander and his 3 bodyguards as they approached. "Some mess your guy made. The cafe stop, called it in. Looks like your guy stumbled onto one hell of an operation," said the officer. "Our guys don't stumble into anything," said the commander and walked over to Ryman's body. He seemed to have a grin etched on his face, but even stranger, a bunch of wild Mexican gold poppies had been placed on his chest. The officer turned to the commander. Took both barrels in the chest. Must have fired simultaneously. He downed Doug Brennan with a shot dead center of his forehead and detonated the explosives. "We got a hell of a body count here. He looks to be over the hill for active service." "How old was he?" the officer asked the commander. "Young enough for what he achieved, but old as Methuselah by the looks of him." Should have been tending his garden, but with the drugs war and all, needs must. One of the finest volunteers we ever had on border duty. Meat wagon's on its way, a police officer called out. Not for Ryman, it isn't, said the commander. He turned to one of his guards. Contact the chopper and have them bring a body bag over. I'll be damned if he doesn't deserve the Medal of Honor for his actions. One hell of a guy, said one of the guards. Hope he gets the medal. The others nodded in agreement, and taking an aluminum tinfoil wrap of weed from his breast pocket, he whizzed it into the burning debris. What was that? Asked the commander. Just some crap, sir. The three guards stood to attention and saluted First Sergeant Joe Ryman. Pleasure to have served with you, sir. Sure was, said another. Every respect. Red 4, over and out. They huddled together as the medics approached to load Ryman's corpse into a body bag. Why did he send us back to base? The chopper crew could have handled the prisoners. We could have helped him and maybe he'd still be alive, said Pete. The drugs, dummy, remember, said Bill. I don't know, said Mick, there is that, but something is still bugging me. Did you see the look on his face when we took off in the chopper? Yeah, I saw it. I think he knew exactly what he was going to do, said Bill. Maybe he didn't think we were ready and didn't want us getting killed? Whatever, I guess we'll never really know. One thing's for sure, I ain't never touching that shit again, said Pete. Sarge was right when he said, them that takes it, is every bit as guilty as the murdering traffickers and dealers who supply it. Same here, said Mike and held out his hand. Is that a promise, guys? I swear, they both said, and they stacked their hands on each other's hands. Mike clasped his other hand on top and they shook before breaking. Let's ask the commander if we can be pallbearers, said Bill. The others nodded. They all turned at the sound of the zipper closing on the body bag. Ryman's eyes seemed to be staring straight at them. The smile still etched on his face. Dear listener, if you've enjoyed the story, don't forget to like it, and to subscribe for more stories to come. Declan Conner is the author of a catalog of full-length psychological, crime, and speculative thriller fiction books available on Amazon in all territories. You'll find the link in the description.